Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Have History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I finished animating the Battle of Resaca and the missed opportunity at Cassville. Now we move into the battles around New Hope Church, including Dallas and Pickett's Mill. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, or purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Joseph E. Johnston and the Confederate Army of Tennessee was now south of the Etowah River and took up positions near Allatoona Pass and the town of Allatoona. Johnston hoped that William T. Sherman and his three armies would advance toward him from the north and launch assaults against his entrenched position. Sherman, in general, didn't want to fight a pitched battle and would rather outmaneuver his enemy. In this case, he did just that. Instead of confronting Johnston head-on, Sherman moved his troops to the west of Johnston's position, aiming for the town of Dallas. The Union general believed if he could threaten Johnston's flank, then the rebel army commander would abandon Allatoona and withdraw closer to Atlanta, possibly south of the Chattahoochee River. Confederate cavalry detected Sherman's move early and notified Johnston. In an uncharacteristic move, Johnston didn't move south, he moved west to confront Sherman and block him from going around his flank. He only moved Leonidas Polk and William Hardee's corps at first, still thinking there might be a push along the railroad, so he kept John Bell Hood's corps at Allatoona. Sherman's juggernaut of an army group pushed south toward Dallas, and the reports coming in Johnston's headquarters confirmed that there was no likelihood of Sherman coming to Allatoona, so Johnston pushed Hood to New Hope Church, just east of Dallas. The rebel troops began to dig in and prepare to make a stand on a line from Dallas to the church. The first Federal troops to make it to the field was Joseph Hooker's 20th Corps, with his lead division under John W. Geary. Impatient and believing that only a small rebel force confronted Hooker at New Hope Church, Sherman ordered Hooker to throw Geary's division against the Confederates, but Hooker believed that the force was much more substantial. He was right, it was Hood's entire corps awaiting the Union soldiers. Hooker waited for his two other divisions to arrive, angering Sherman. Hooker's columns were aimed in the direction of Alexander P. Stewart's division of that corps, and all of Stewart's brigades were digging in, except for Marcellus Stovall's brigade, which found itself in the graveyard of the church. Those men hunkered down behind the stone sentinels. It was after 4 p.m. on May 25th before Hooker got his division on the field and began aligning them for the assault, placing them in columns of brigades to make the assault. It was about 5:30 p.m. when they stepped off against the rebel works. Alpheus Williams' division hit Stewart's line first, with Daniel Butterfield's division behind and to the left of Williams. Geary's division was kept in reserve. The battle erupted around the church in a hail of lead and iron. One soldier remembered, "In the midst of the din there was one mighty peal of thunder, so loud, so deep, so profound that we were awe-stricken. It made our heavy guns sound like the snapping of matches in comparison. It was comforting as well as awe-inspiring, for it made us remember that God was on His throne and still watching over His world." No one who heard that peal of thunder could ever forget it. Stewart, as his nickname of Old Straight suggested, sat straight in his saddle watching his men battle against the Federals. Stewart's son, Carruthers Stewart, barely 18 years old, was on Stewart's staff. Seeing his father get too close to the battle, he yelled out, "Now, Father, you know you promised Mother that you would not expose yourself today." Stewart's men howled with laughter at the comment, and as the general rode by, the soldiers would yell out, "Now, Father!" A courier from Johnston came up to Stewart and asked if he needed reinforcements. Stewart replied, "My own troops will hold the position." Unconvinced by Old Straight, Johnston sent some troops from Polk's corps to bolster Stewart's line. One of the soldiers who came from Polk's corps remembered, "The roar of musketry and boom of artillery mingled together told plainly that blood was being spilled freely, and with a yell we pressed on to let Hood's men know that help was near and encouraged them to stand to their post. Before we reached the battlefield, stray bullets began to strike in our ranks, and several were killed and wounded. Just in rear of Hood's line, we were halted and found that both sides were merely holding their own. We rested a few minutes and somewhat recovered our breath when we were ordered forward. Then came the tug of war. The Yanks contested the ground stubbornly, and the carnage was fearful. Part of Williams's division began to gain ground near a Louisiana artillery battery. The rain and blast from the cannons and rifled musketry hid in amongst the Union soldiers, but still they persisted through the tangled dense forest. Among the artillery crew were 3 brothers with the last name of Bridgens. The oldest brother was working the rammer and was almost immediately killed as William's men approached. Another brother grabbed the rammer to ram a charge home, and he was killed. The third and youngest brother stepped up to the muzzle of the cannon and took his brother's place. Miraculously, he survived the battle. As darkness began to cover the battlefield, Hooker recalled his divisions. As Hooker's men pulled back from the field, Oliver Otis Howard, commander of the 4th Corps, rode up. He feared that the other commanders might blame him for the failed assault. His army commander, George Thomas, prodded him all day to get to the front to help Hooker, but to no avail. Some of the top generals that night sat around a campfire discussing the day's events. Howard, being a teetotaler and very religious, attempted to avoid situations where alcohol and harsh language was present, and that night was no different. Plus, Howard and Hooker didn't get along very well to begin with. Hooker partially blamed Howard for the defeat at the Battle of Chancellorsville, where Stonewall Jackson rolled up Howard's flank. Around the campfire that night, Hooker commended Williams on his attack. Williams recounted the scene in a letter home. Everyone congratulated me on the splendid manner my division made the advance. General Hooker said to me, it was the most magnificent sight of the war. That in all his experience, he has never seen anything so splendid. As the generals talked, burial parties, hospital attendants, and comrades scoured the battlefield looking for dead and wounded. One soldier described the aftermath of battle in general from what he saw at New Hope Church. The soldier is mortally wounded on the field, but not quite dead. He is borne on a litter to a safe position where the ambulances of his brigade takes him to the hospital. There, the doctor perhaps pronounces his case hopeless, and he is laid aside where he lingers for an hour, perhaps a day, then dies. If there is any hope his wound is dressed, then perhaps he dies after a day or so, and he meets a soldier's burial, in the same clothes in which he died, unwashed, smeared in his own gore, a horrid sight. We dig him a grave 2 feet deep, wrap him in his blanket, if he has one, and cover him up. Such is a soldier's burial at the hospital. Private R.J. McGowan of the 37th Alabama was put into the back of an ambulance and taken to a hospital after being knocked unconscious by an artillery shell. He laid there for several hours until the doctor pronounced him dead, and he was dragged off the table. As they took him up to roll him in his blanket preparatory to laying him in his grave, he gave a kick, and he was laid down and in a few minutes was able to sit up. A few minutes more to the horror of war would have been added that of being buried alive. The Union lost 1,665 troops in the attacks by Hooker's corps. The Confederacy's casualty list numbered about 400, most coming from Stuart's division. This was still a filling out process for Sherman. He had no idea what force was in front of him. Was it just a division, a corps, or the entire Confederate Army? The rest of Sherman's army group was yet to come up, but most of them would be up the next day.